Here again with another Lucifer Season 5 episode review video. Before I get into that though, pretty important if you aren't caught up to the point where I am every watching or watching Lucifer, or you're just not entirely sure, then you definitely need to take the initiative and pay attention to the episode's title, which of course I'll mention as well as put in the description. If that happens to be the case, you find that you're not caught up, it would be my recommendation that you don't watch this video any further to avoid any potential spoilers. And for all of you out there that are wondering, this is indeed my first time watching the show Lucifer, so join me on the journey and let's discuss the show in the comment section, along with the legendary Crazy Coffee Man, who's a Lucifer fanatic, as well as a Dexter and Breaking Bad fan. But let's talk about this awesome and amazing show. With all that said, this will be Lucifer Season 5, Episode 12. The title of this episode is called Daniel Espinoza, Naked and Afraid. And this will be my review reaction recap after just finishing watching the episode. We started off with Dan's alarm going off in the morning, showing his routine for breakfast, working out, combing his hair, to the office looking at files. Daniel, you've been staring at that file for 10 minutes now, Lucifer tells Daniel. And then Lucifer calls Dan useless and tolerated. And then Dan gets a little upset by that, and then Lucifer goes to Chloe's desk. Detective Douche is a real joy to be around today. And Chloe says, you have to give him some time. Remember what I did when I first found out the truth? I'm sorry you're hurting can't annoy Dan. Detective Douche can take all the time he needs as far as I'm concerned, Lucifer says. Lucifer gives the grunt work, or the grunt work case to Dan. He'll do it as he could, he wouldn't mind the drive. So Dan drives to, was it Mexico? I can't remember where he drives to now. I didn't put it down. But he meets with an old friend of his, an old partner who does things shady like he used to do. And that would be Luis. And Luis wants to get some drinks for old times. Dan agrees to have one drink. And Dan tells Luis his actions have consequences. And Dan tells Luis God even makes mistakes. And then Luis wants Dan to join him on a business adventure. And Dan says that's just not me anymore. Can't do it. So they have some tequila shots with, what's the guy's name? Benito, who's one of Luis's friends. And then Dan wakes up the next morning, or maybe it was afternoon at this point, and he is dead. That being Benito, and Dan is freaking out. So he runs out and tells Luis that Benito is naked, that's not right, I'm sorry. Runs out and tells Luis all this information about Benito being dead, and Dan's naked, and Dan wants to call it in. Luis knows who killed Benito, his friend, and Dan wonders why the Russian mob would want to kill Benito. Luis owes the Russian mob over $200,000, and Luis wants Dan to deliver the prisoner and the money that he owes. So Dan reluctantly does this. He's in the car with the prisoner that they have and the cash, and the prisoner tells Dan to find God. She says God helped him. You think you know things, and then life has a way of blindsiding you. Dan's vehicle gets smashed by another vehicle. And then after Dan wakes up, he notices the money's gone and the prisoner is gone. Dan's phone is dead and another car approaches. It's some guys from his improv class just randomly show up. So Dan gets a ride from them. Dan goes to the penthouse. Lucifer tells Dan he looks truly awful. Dan needs a favor. Dan needs Lucifer's help due to the money, which is why he doesn't get the police involved. And then Lucifer tells Daniel he's not his muscle. He can't do it without Lucifer, though. So Lucifer agrees to help. Dan climbs over a gate, comes in through the back, knocks a bunch of things over because Dan's clumsy. And then at Benny's, it's a bicycle shop, not a motorcycle shop. And then while Dan has entered through the back, Lucifer has come through the front entrance, essentially distracting the employees that are there. Another guy in the back tries to grab the box of money, and Dan points his gun at the man. Give me the box. He tells Dan he's making a huge mistake. And as Dan is trying to climb over the gate, Dan gets attacked by a dog. He apparently gets away from the dog and comes inside the front entrance. And the person Dan was transporting in his vehicle recognizes Dan. So Lucifer will take care of the people inside as he's the muscle, and Dan takes a bike and leaves. And then Dan wipes out, and Benito's head was in the box. Luis is there and says, Dan, come on, you never look in the box. I don't know if that's a play in the movie, or they're essentially using the movie Seven here, because there's a big thing with what's in the box in Seven with Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kevin Spacey. Anyway, one of the men that Luis is with hits Dan in the head and knocks him out with a gun. Dan wakes up. Luis has charged Dan's phone for him, and Luis says Benito wasn't his friend and betrayed him. Okay, and then Luis says Dan is on the hook for transporting human remains across crime syndicates. Luis wants Dan to kill the Russian bookkeeper. Luis gave Dan a neurotoxin. Dan has 10 hours to kill the Russian bookkeeper. If he does it, he'll give Dan the antidote. And then Dan asks Ella how he could tell if a murder was fake. And then Detective Douche says Ella is the best forensic scientist he's ever worked with. But he never worked with a guy named Dexter Morgan of Miami Metro Homicide. Real talk now. No more bull crud. Ella's been working on the perfect murder for her novel. Dan goes to see Svetlana. No police warrant. He's not there with a warrant or anything. And then Dan gets knocked out by Svetlana. So Dan has a habit of getting knocked out by people. So Dan calls for help and calls Amenadiel. Dan gets a flight on Amenadiel. Maze surprises Dad. Maze surprises Dan. I'm a demon, Dad, and you can't tell me? This is me. No secrets. Maze promises not to laugh, but she laughs anyway. And then Maze calls Dan a dumbass. Maze tells Dan she'll get Dan proof that he killed the Russian bookkeeper, even though he doesn't kill her. Maze says Dan will have to be Joe Stone. She's only helping him because it's him. So Dan talks to the Russians, and then Linda Martin shows up during this meeting. She calls him Dan. So Dan gets up and is like, what are you doing here? Well, I always come to this place on this day. I can't remember what it's Tuesday afternoon or Thursday afternoon. So he's like, hit me. And he doesn't really have to explain much at all. Linda just clocks him and does that without any hesitation. And then he kind of like talks to her for another second or two when he gets back up. And then he walks back to the table. Like, that's just one of my side women. I don't tell them my real name. And then Linda comes back over and splashes Dan with, a glass of water. And that's what you get. And that's for what you did to me, she says. And then, like I said, then Dan tells the Russian guy his side pieces and he never tells him his real name. It worked. The Russian likes Dan even more now. Lucifer says Dan looks pretty good because he's all dressed up. Lux will be closed for this private party. Dan's improv guys are brought in by Lucifer to be his backup. And Luis is impressed by Dan's crew. Maze brings in Svetlana and says Luis can kill her if he wants proofs himself. And then, of course, the Russians show up. Luis says, you sold me out. And then the Russians find out that Dan did lie, that his name is really Dan. And Dan, he's freaking out now. And he's like, everybody just calm down, calm down. He gets everybody to lower their weapons. But everybody starts firing once the Benny's bicycle shop people show up. And they start firing. So Maze actually jumps in front of a bullet for Dan. Turns out, though, Lucifer staged this whole entire thing. Everybody's in on it. And everyone is okay, including Maze. Luis asked Dan if he had fun. And Dan says, it was fun. And Dan really thought that Maze died. And Maze says, do you think I'd take a bullet for you? Not in the chest, anyway. And then Lucifer says... the total to set all this up was $5,004,157. All well spent. And then Daniel Espinoza, naked and afraid. Cheers. The detective would have seen right through. everything. That's why she wasn't brought in. And Lucifer knew that Dan's optimism would keep him going. Whenever given the choice, Dan always tries to do the right thing. And Dan says Lucifer really helped him. And then Dan asks Lucifer, why did you do this? And Lucifer did it because Daniel fucking shot him, he says. And that's what ends this episode of Lucifer. So, yeah, it was okay. I'll give it an 8.3 out of 10. Character of the episode, Daniel Espinoza, was pretty much focused around him. We have a female character, wasn't as strong in this one, but I feel like the scene with Linda Martin was awesome when she punched Dan and then splashed the water on him. So I liked that. I did not see this twist coming, like I heard from the man, the myth, the legend, the legendary Crazy Coffin Man about the 5,004,157. I didn't know that this was how much it cost for Lucifer to play this big elaborate prank. I guess it's not really a prank, but it is a prank. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Entertaining episode. Oh, special recognition to Luis. He was actually really good, but you can't. I mean, Dan was awesome in this episode, and I can't have Luis over Dan in this particular episode. So you've heard everything that I have to say. Now it's your turn. If you're a fan of Lucifer and you want to help me out with the YouTube algorithm, please consider Hulk smashing the like button, share the video with a friend, put this video on any one of your social media platforms. Don't forget to sound off in the comment section and let us know, me and the legendary Crazy Coffin Man, about your thoughts on the episode. What would you rate this episode? Who would be your male character? Who would be your female character? Or if you just want to do one character in general, it's always usually Lucifer, but you can do that as well. And then last but certainly not least, don't forget to hit that sub button, subscribe to the channel. You're watching the video anyway. Join the team, show your damn support, and be a part of something special. And you never know what you're going to see on JDev TV.